Welcome to episode 11 of the Most Important Skill in Life podcast. Today's episode is based on an article that I wrote and published on my website on August 2nd, 2024, entitled Every Version of You Matters. And let me take a second to pull it up here. And let me just read to you folks the article from my website. One of the greatest benefits of being taunted and called names growing up. Let me start that again, folks. One of the greatest benefits of being taunted and called names growing up is that I became callous to such things. If I got called slow or fat or ugly, it wasn't that it didn't hurt. I just learned to not yield to the hurt. As I've said so often, I learned to use pain to push my efforts in fitness, athletics, and academics. I was driven to succeed. When you are driven to succeed, you hunt for results, which means you are objective about the problem. I was slow. I was fat. I was for damn sure intimidated by smaller classmates. I had no problem admitting these things to myself because I saw that brutal honesty with self as the first step to being able to solve these problems. But most people know the ugly truth about themselves and they do everything to avoid it. This is why phones can be such a vice for people. You can avoid being alone with your own thoughts 24/7. What I was able to do, and what I believe you can do as well, is separate your sense of self-worth from the objective reality of what you are. What you are, specifically being those shortcomings that you truly desire to change. What you are is not what you are worth. We value one another based on what we are all the time. The kids in school only saw me as fat, unathletic, and timid, so they looked down on me and ridiculed me. It was worse because I was always one of the biggest kids in my school and people felt I should be stronger and less cowardly. But deep down, I believed that I was more than their interpretation of my physical appearance. I knew I had done nothing to deserve the treatment I was getting, and I thought it important to fight for my sense of self-worth, fight to feed it and keep it alive despite the difficulties of my environment. There were challenges at home. My older sister physically and sexually abused me, and my mother verbally berated me on a regular basis. Again, no matter what they did or said, I knew I was a good kid and I hadn't done anything to deserve this treatment. Even as a little kid, it seems as though the fire of my experience forced me to ask deep questions and form deep narratives early in life. Do I love myself? Do I believe in myself? Will I let their words dictate my actions? One day, I will be stronger because of these things. Things were already hard. So to look at the truth of my chronic overeating, pornography use, timidity in the face of verbally aggressive people, etc., actually wasn't that difficult. Doing so gave me an accurate place from which to begin solving those problems. Furthermore, a willingness to begin taking action is often a public declaration that we are trying to change something. I distinctly remember running slowly up a hill near my high school, and one of my classmates who would have called himself my friend drove by in his old red Pontiac and laughed out of his window. He must have thought, he's been fat as long as I've known him. Why is he trying to change? The possibility of encountering scenarios like these often stifles many people's actions even if they are willing to acknowledge the truth of their circumstances. The risk of people seeing you toil in the infancy of your journey and potentially mock you for trying is too great for people to even think about, let alone endure. So people sit still trying to ignore the truth and telling themselves a story that justifies the lack of action. But what would you do if your self-worth truly came from you and not what people thought about you? What would you do if you told yourself that the fire of unsolicited criticism of your efforts was simply a means to forge stronger character? What if you told yourself that absorbing undeserved offense without the possibility of apology was developing your empathy and preparing you to be a true living example to others seeking light in their times of darkness? If people could internalize these ideas, they could face themselves as they are and work towards what they want to be, with the understanding that every version of us is valuable. In my experience, it was my most feeble version that actually needed to exist to create the evolving journey to my strongest version. They're all me, and I love me. You should love you. Again, the title of that article is Every Version of You Matters. And I I published that on my website, on my blog on August 2nd, 2024. I'll put the link to that in the description of this video. But just to expound upon what I just read and talk about some of the finer points in a little bit more detail. I'm looking at my notes here, y'all. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of, some people might call it hitting rock bottom, or sometimes, when our life is on the line, like certainly when I was in training in the Army to be a Green Beret, and then ultimately when I found myself in Afghanistan, when your life is potentially on the line, or when you've hit rock bottom, or when you just found yourself in a situation where you're kind of in the fire of adversity and you're trying to change things or move towards some objective. These times, quote, hitting rock bottom, being in the fire of the situation, the fire of adversity, these are perfect opportunities to look at the truth. Why? Because things are already messed up. And I think a part of the good fortune of my upbringing, like I mentioned, like being called names every day, dealing with different forms of abuse at home and difficulties at home. And I love my mother, still love my sister. She's not alive anymore. But we all make mistakes. But being in the fire of that situation and being able to, and maybe more importantly, being able to recognize that I didn't deserve any of that, it became very common for me to just say to myself, like, okay, Travis, you are slow, you are fat, you are easily intimidated. Like, okay, now what do you want to do about those things? Do you want to keep going in that direction, or do you want to change those things? Because look, the other option is maybe I'm totally self-confident and I'm totally fine with how I physically perform and how I physically look, and maybe I just learn how to go back at the other kids. That could have been the journey that I went on. I could have learned how to what's the word I'm looking for? We used to call it snapping or like cracking when I was a kid, but like I could basically learn how to make fun of the other kids and how to be more verbally witty. That's the word I'm looking for. How to be more verbally sharp and witty to sort of tear down their comments about me, and slash work on my mental confidence, et cetera, et cetera. But what I chose and what I truly wanted was I wanted to be an athlete. And so I chose to look at it as like, I'm going to use that fire as fuel to work on these problems and move myself towards what I want to be. Because it's not like if the kids were calling me fat, I didn't want to be fat to be good in the eyes of that kid. I didn't want to be fat anymore because I didn't want my knees to hurt anymore. I wanted to be confident when I took my shirt off, and I wanted to be more athletic, and I wanted to be able to compete with the other kids. That's why I wanted to lose weight. It wasn't about what they were saying about me, but this again, and I'm glad I took the workout route as opposed to taking the witty, snappy comeback route, which I got nothing against that. I think that's useful in its own way and very powerful, obviously, in its own way as a communicator. But the reason I'm glad that I went the workout route is because the older I get, and I think I'll probably say this a million times, y'all, but the older I get, the more I recognize that when we do hard things physically, it helps to transform our level of confidence in ourselves and in our ability to do hard things. So when we transform ourselves in some way physically, like a meaningful way physically, like whether it be losing weight, gaining endurance, gaining strength, gaining some physical skill like martial arts that you didn't have prior, and the process and the journey of acquiring those skills and traits, that's that has all that always has the power to transform the intangibles about who we are, and it gives us the confidence that in the future we can do hard things as well. And having that confidence that you can do hard things is sort of the I think one of the prerequisites to being willing to look at the ugly truth about yourself, to be willing to acknowledge the shortcomings, the things about yourself that you want to change. And that sort of that 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 takes me kind of to the next step here. I talked about, there was a line that I use, toiling in infancy. When I started working out as a young man, and in particularly I mentioned being in high school at one point, and I'm running up this hill, and one of my classmates at the time, he drives by, he's laughing at me as I'm struggling to run up this hill. I'm still close to or over 300 pounds at this point. I'm probably a junior or senior in high school at this point, and I'm working out like I had been at that point for 5-6 years, to no avail. And he's laughing because the whole time he knew me from middle school, he knew me in high school. That whole time I've always been overweight. He's probably thinking, what is he even thinking, trying to do such a thing? Like, is he crazy? And this is something, again, I am so grateful for the younger version of myself that had to deal with and navigate all of those problems, because it fostered in me a type of resilience where it's not that I'm not afraid to fail publicly. I'm just, how would I say this? Like, I am afraid to fail, but I have the courage to fail. So fear of failure is not going to stop me from trying a thing that I might fail at. I think that's the best way that I can say it. Fear of failure is not going to stop me from trying to do the thing that I want to do, that is where it's highly likely that I may fail. Like, that's why I wasn't afraid to start a business. That's why I wasn't afraid to join the military and try out for special forces. That's why I wasn't afraid to quit engineering and go try to build a life away from corporate America. In all of those scenarios, I had people actively, fretting around me, like, oh, you might fail, oh, you might fail. But it's like, I don't want to live my life, and I'm encouraging other people not to live their lives where you're afraid to lose in front of people. And again, the value of growing up the way I did. I mean, whether it was sports competitions, and even certainly in sports, I was failing all the time. But part of the solace I had was academically, I was pretty good. But even in academics, I was maybe run of the mill, and I had to work really hard to be kind of a run of the mill good student. Like, I didn't make perfect straight A's. I didn't do super well on the SAT, ACT, even though I studied really hard. And there were classmates that I had, some of the same people who picked on me all the time, who I knew didn't study, didn't work hard in school, who went and took the SAT, ACT, and they made great scores on them and got offered academic scholarships to college. These same people who would call me fat and slow and whatever, who I know, like, they never did any homework, they barely showed up to class, and they come in and smoke the SAT, ACT, right? And so after a while, I didn't even have academics as solace for who I could be or why I should be confident in myself. But like I mentioned in the article, man, I love me. So whatever, like, move on. Like, you're gonna lose. But for me, it's always been about knowing that, one, man, this is America. I can try the things that I want to try. So I'm not gonna go to my grave with all these things that I wanted to do and know that I didn't do them because I was too much of a coward because I was afraid to fail. Like, no, let's have some courage and let's go ahead and fail. Because the more you do it, the less afraid you're going to be of it. Right. But again, toiling in infancy. Let me give some specific examples of this. And here's what I say. Here's what I'll say. We know that every long journey is made up of small steps, but everybody wants to accelerate past that process. So we don't want anybody to see us toiling in infancy. I'm 300 pounds, and anybody else that's 300 pounds at that time, they're looking at me and they're like, how can you run slowly up this hill in front of everybody and let everybody see you struggling, overweight, out of breath to get up this hill? How can you do that? That's so embarrassing. Nobody wants to be seen toiling in the infancy of their journey. And so different examples of this. Business. Lots of people want to start businesses, but they don't because they don't want to fail, because the likelihood of failure is high. And like, I think you can go online and look at those pictures of Jeff Bezos when Amazon was like still, I think, in the house that his wife was paying for at the time. I may be wrong about that. I may not have the facts exactly straight, but like they were boxing up books like in his living room or something like that. If you the pictures online, like and now what is Amazon, right? Like everything big we see starts from humble beginnings, and we so easily forget that. But yeah, businesses. Look, money, and like having money for retirement, because most of us won't have successful businesses if we're going to have more than just whatever Social Security is left by the time we get there. It's going to take decades of diligently and consistently saving money, because time is what creates that seven-figure retirement in the long run. And I mean, and I still don't know if I'm going to be able to create that, because I started saving late. Again, time, right? Like, had I started saving 10% of every dollar I made from when I first started working at 15, 16 years old, like I'd be in a pretty significant place by now. But it is what it is. So I'm gonna just, I've been working hard on it the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm gonna just keep working hard on it. But lots of people don't even think about saving, because we put it off as this far off thing, not recognizing that even the $20 you put away once a month, that accumulates over time, and maybe over time you contribute more, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so you have to think about these things. Toiling in infancy, you got to start somewhere. Look, with my writing and content and YouTube, people, oh my God, people are constantly, when I tell them I have a podcast or a YouTube channel, constantly the assumption is, oh, you're making money off of that, right? No. People do not understand like how hard it is to build like a financially viable business off of content creation. It's just as hard as building any other business. It takes a lot of time and a lot of consistency, which is why I'm always telling people, if you're going to do content online and that's something you really want to go after, you need to pick the pace and the platforms that make sense for you, because it's going to be a long road. It's going to be it could be a decade before anything pops. So you got to pick a pace of posting and a platform and a style of posting that fits with who you are, so that you can last over that long, long journey to success, if success is even possible. And of course, exercise, man. I mentioned it, earlier with the running up the hill, but like, the one of the big excuses you hear from people all the time about not going to the gym is they don't want to look embarrassed, right? They don't want to toil in infancy and have people seeing them toil in infancy, because that's too embarrassing. I want people to see me toiling in my infancy. But when are you going to begin? When and where are you going to begin? And so you got to start somewhere. So fitness is a big one. And again, last one, martial arts. That's another one. When people first start boxing or first start doing jujitsu, I can attest to this. When I first started, like, you look awkward, you move awkward, you're not efficient, and everybody that you spar with is crushing you, and it sucks, and it feels, and it's embarrassing. But man, that kind of that suck factor becomes the motivation for getting to the gym and getting better. And so, like, we know that all long journeys are made up of small steps. And so we have to be mindful of when we're avoiding the toiling. Again, when you start working hard at something to change something, a lot of times it's a public declaration that I'm trying to change something about myself. And in the beginning, you're an infant. You're an infant in that journey. And we have to just which and this leads to the next point. We have to let go of what we think people think about us and just focus on what we're doing and move forward because those steps add up. Remember the last podcast, every rep counts. Those steps add up. And finally, and again, to my final point, like I read it in the article, what you are versus what you're worth. These are not the same things. And the idea here is, and I've been trying to do this ever since I started doing motivational speaking and creating motivational content way back in 2015 or 2013. I'm sorry. That's when I did my first blog. I've been thinking about trying to advocate for this idea of separating your self-worth from your present state or your condition, the condition of who you are. Because I think people sometimes think that if we want to change something about ourselves, or if there's something about ourselves we don't like, then that must mean that we don't value ourselves as a person. And I just don't think that's true. I think the process of, I think almost like especially in the modern society, the process of change and the process of growing as a person is sort of necessary in a technologically and scientifically advanced society. In a society where we have so much access and it's so easy to meet our needs and even our desires and wants and our like cravings, the ability to change and express deeper levels of self-awareness and self-discipline is very extremely important. And so the idea here is that we value human life as a society. So every human being is worthy, and is what do I mean by that? Is worthy, oh man, like what am I trying to say? Like I don't know, worthy to be self-confident, to have self-worth, to have self-esteem. And I can't put a number on it. I think we just recognize when somebody doesn't have self-worth versus when somebody does. And what the idea here is to put that aside because it's yours. You are valuable. You are worth love. You are worth loving yourself. I am worth love and worth loving myself. So what I try to do and what I try to encourage you to do is put that aside. My self-worth is intact. If I could just believe that and know that no matter what my present condition is, my self-worth is still there, then it makes it easier to look at myself and say, okay, even if I'm overweight, even if I think I'm ugly, even if I think I'm stupid or slow or whatever it is, I can just be objective about who I am today and then be honest about where I'd like my life to go. Because I know that no matter what I do, whether I regress from where I am or whether I achieve progress from where I am, my self-worth is intact. And I think this is something that I'm still learning to do, but I think I started learning it from a young age because I think otherwise I used to have conversations with myself and like I talked about those deep questions I would ask myself. Do I love myself? Do I believe that I'm deserving of good things, et cetera, et cetera? And some of the language, you can do a lot of nitpicking with some of the language. Somebody might say, well, does anybody deserve anything? Like, I don't know, whatever, man. Like the point here is like, I was experiencing life in a particular way that I didn't like, and I wanted to change it. And part of solving those problems of being overweight, being timid, being picked on, and being scared of other people, lacking self-confidence, part of solving those problems is just acknowledging that they exist and being honest about what I have to do to move forward. As someone who desires results, you have to desire the truth so you can accurately solve the problem. And so if you don't have self-worth, or if your self-worth is tied to your present condition or people's interpretation of your present condition, then it's very easy to tell stories that don't unsettle who you think you are, right? Like maybe you are overweight and deep down you know you are, and deep down you know you want to change it, but because I don't know, because you don't want people to see you toiling in the infancy of trying to lose weight, and because you don't want to fail, because you don't want people to think you're a failure, and you don't want people to see you struggling to change something about yourself, you decide to tell yourself a story of like, no, I'm fine with my weight. My weight is good. My weight is actually healthy. I shouldn't even worry about it. And maybe you even start telling yourself stuff like exercise is bad. You shouldn't do exercise because it actually destroys your body. Right? Like you start just making up stuff to justify staying the same. And that's a big part of what I'm trying to get people to not do. Take ownership of your self-worth, take ownership of your self-confidence, decide that you are worth the good things. Well, let me not even say that. Decide, man, yeah, just going back to childhood here, man. Decide that you're worth fighting for. Decide that your hopes and dreams are worth fighting for. Decide that your peace of mind is worth fighting for. And it's a mental fight and a practical fight. Because there's just some things, look, y'all, I still have loose skin from being over 300 pounds. And that's never going to change unless I want to get a bunch of cosmetic surgeries. I went through one surgery to get some loose skin removed that was causing some problems. But after that, I decided I was done. And so like whenever I take off my shirt and like you can see skin sagging, and that's always going to be there. And at some point I just had to decide like it is what it is. Like I can't change it unless I want to go under the knife over and over again for, I don't know, how many times, but I don't want to do that. So I accept it about myself. So obviously there are some things physically I can't change myself, about myself, but I can change the way I think about myself, right? And so what if you could separate your self-worth from your actual present condition? And what if you could just be objective and look at yourself and problem solve on the things that you want to change and understand that your self-worth is always intact? What would you be willing to do? What would you be willing to try? That's the point of that. Look, y'all, this is the Most Important Skill in Life podcast. Remember, the most important skill in life is personal ownership. Personal ownership is taking responsibility for your actions, beliefs, and overall direction in life. Remember that principle is based on my book, Adapt and Overcome: 3 Principles to Master the Most Important Skill in Life, which is personal ownership. Remember, those 3 skills relate to actions, beliefs, direction in life. And look, y'all, like I said in the post, if it wasn't for growing up that overweight kid who got picked on and bullied and who was so timid and so shy, if it wasn't for, I think a lot of my ability to evolve as a person started with my ability to say to myself, like, I love me. I value me. And by doing that, it gave me the belief that it was worth trying to change in the ways that I wanted to change. And so, change is the hardest thing we do in life. I say that in the book, but I believe I can change. I believe you can change. And a lot of that is just because I love me and I think you should love you. So, folks, take that with you, and until next time.